Layla is a young woman in her mid-20s, driven by a passion for travel and discovering mysterious places. She decided to accompany her friend Sarah on a trip to an ancient city famous for its traditional markets, where history blends with legend. They entered the market at sunset, when the sunlight slipped between the old buildings and painted the walls in faint golden hues. The air was thick with the scent of incense and aged leather, and the voices of vendors mingled with the footsteps of passers-by, creating a strange atmosphere suspended between life and unease. Among the narrow alleys, a small shop appeared before them, almost hidden between the other stores. Its facade was dim, and the carpets hanging at the entrance resembled curtains that concealed more than they revealed. There were no customers, only a thin man standing behind an old wooden table. His eyes were sunken like dark hollows, and when he welcomed them, his voice was soft, yet left an eerie echo in the ear. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest and whispered to Layla, "This place doesn't feel right. Let's go." But Layla, driven by curiosity, stepped closer. She felt something pulling her inside, as though the shop were silently calling to her. The hanging fabrics seemed to move with a breeze that didn't exist, and the patterns on the carpets resembled eyes watching from within. The man smiled a cold smile and said in a hoarse voice, "Welcome. I have been waiting for someone who can appreciate these treasures." Layla did not understand what he meant, but she felt that the journey had not truly begun until she stepped into that place. Layla and Sarah entered the shop hesitantly. The atmosphere inside was completely different from the bustling market outside. The light was dim, coming from small oil lamps that swayed as though breathing with the room. A strange scent mixed with the incense, heavier, closer to the smell of burnt wood or rotting old papers. Dozens of carpets hung on the walls, some bright and colorful, others dark as though carrying secrets. But only one caught Layla's attention, a large carpet with deep, dark colors and intricate, tangled patterns that stirred confusion, like open eyes facing every direction. The shopkeeper approached, his smile cold, his voice hoarse. "This is no ordinary carpet. It is a unique piece, woven with threads known only to a few." Sarah felt even more uneasy and whispered, "I don't like this man, or this carpet. Let's leave." But Layla, as if enchanted by the beauty of the patterns, reached out to touch it. It felt soft, yet unnaturally cold, as if it were stone rather than fabric. The man looked at her with gleaming eyes, placed his hand on the carpet, and murmured incomprehensible words, like broken whispers. It was as though he were blessing it, or awakening something within it. Then he wrapped it slowly, almost ritualistically, not merely as packaging, but as if performing a ceremony. As he handed it to her, he said, "This will adorn your home, and it will stay with you always." Layla smiled lightly, unaware of the strangeness of his words, while Sarah felt they carried a hidden meaning, like a warning or a threat. They left the shop, but Layla could not deny that something about that carpet made her feel she had purchased not just a piece of decor, but something far greater. Layla returned to her country, carrying the carpet among her belongings as if it were a precious treasure. On the way back, she kept staring at its dark patterns, feeling as though the shapes changed whenever she looked at them from a different angle. Sarah tried to distract her with conversation, but she noticed Layla had grown quieter than usual, as if lost in something unseen. When she arrived home, she placed the carpet in the living room. The room suddenly seemed darker, even though the windows were open and the daylight bright. The patterns on the carpet appeared to glow faintly, as if breathing with the space. Layla smiled and told herself, "It will make the house more beautiful, a rare piece of art." But that night, the dreams began. She saw herself walking down a long, dark corridor, its walls covered with the same patterns as the carpet. The corridor had no end, and as she walked, she felt the walls closing in on her, breathing. Unintelligible whispers echoed around her, and sometimes she saw shadows moving quickly behind her, vanishing whenever she turned around. She woke suddenly, her heart pounding, sweat covering her forehead. From a distance, she looked toward the living room and saw the carpet in its place, but she felt as though its patterns were staring at her in the darkness. She tried to convince herself it was just a dream, yet the image of the corridor lingered in her mind, as if she had never truly left it. The next day, she sat in front of the carpet, studying it. The colors seemed darker, and the patterns appeared to move ever so slightly. She did not dare touch it, yet she could not look away. There was something mysterious binding her to it, something she could not explain. A few days passed after Layla placed the carpet in her living room, but the house was no longer the same. At first, it had been only disturbing dreams. Now they were beginning to turn into waking terror. "You will not leave me. The house is mine now." Layla trembled. The carpet slipped from her hands and fell back into place as though it had never moved. The patterns on its surface began shifting before her eyes, forming a vague face. Two black eyes staring mercilessly at her, and an open mouth curved into a demonic smile. She stepped backward, but the walls seemed to close in around her. The house had become a prison. The voices grew louder. Fragmented whispers, muffled laughter, footsteps moving through the corridors. Everything screamed that this place no longer belonged to her. In that moment, Layla realized it was no longer dreams or imagination. The carpet was not a piece of decor. It was a gateway to something else. Something dark, stretching its roots through her home, demanding control over her life. The fear consuming Layla made her understand that the solution was no longer in her hands. Each night, the voices intensified, the shadows clearer, until she began to feel the house was no longer hers. In a moment of desperation, she remembered a sheikh known in the city for reciting the Quran to expel evil spirits, and she decided to seek his help. She went to him in the morning, her face pale and her eyes red from sleeplessness. Sitting before him, she told her story, her words trembling as they left her lips. The sheikh listened silently, not interrupting, though from time to time he raised his eyebrows as if he understood what was happening. When she finished, he said calmly, "What you are describing is not an illusion. Something was placed in that carpet to serve as a dwelling for evil. We must confront it with the Quran." That evening, the sheikh came to her house. He entered the living room, fixed his gaze upon the carpet, then sat before it and placed the Holy Quran in his hands. He began reciting verses in a powerful voice, his tone filling the room like a light piercing through darkness. Suddenly, the walls trembled and the carpet shook as if trying to escape. From within it came a sharp scream, not a human cry, but a strange sound like torn wind. The patterns on the carpet began to move, transforming into distorted faces that screamed and melted into one another. Layla stood behind the sheikh, her hands trembling. Yet with every verse recited, she felt a sense of calm slowly seep into her heart. Sarah, who had come to support her, gripped her hand tightly, as though drawing courage from the sound of the Quran. The sheikh did not stop. He continued reciting, and the louder his voice rose, the fainter the other sounds became. The shadows began to retreat. It was like an invisible battle between the light of sacred words and the darkness within the carpet. As the recitation went on, the house gradually regained its peace. The voices that once filled the walls faded away, and the shadows that had danced in the corridors dissolved like smoke in the air. For the first time in days, Layla felt her chest breathe freely, as though a crushing weight had finally lifted. The carpet, once the center of all terror, now looked like nothing more than a dull piece of fabric. The patterns that had shifted and twisted into grotesque faces lay still again. But the sheikh did not leave it there. After finishing the recitation, he turned to Layla and said firmly, "This carpet was enchanted, and now its effect has been nullified. But it must not remain here. It must be destroyed." Despite her fear, Layla felt a new strength flowing through her. With Sarah's help, she carried the carpet outside. At first, it had always seemed unbearably heavy, but now it felt lighter, as though whatever had inhabited it was gone. She set it on fire and stood watching the flames consume the dark threads. With every spark that flew upward, she felt a piece of her nightmare disappear. When the carpet turned to ash, a cold breeze rose and carried the ashes into the sky. Layla closed her eyes, feeling a peace she had not known in a long time. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder and said with a trembling smile, "It's over. Finally." But as Layla stared at the drifting ashes, she could not stop herself from wondering, was it truly over? Or had the shadows that once inhabited her home found another way to return? Our